And I think at that stage, those moments of doubt just pop into your head. I'm not good enough, I'm not smart enough, why am I not like the others?
A whisper behind palace doors has exploded into a storm. Princess Beatrice has walked away, and the truth behind it all begins with a test no one saw coming. For decades, Princess Beatrice of York stood quietly in the royal backdrop, often overshadowed by more public figures, rarely the subject of controversy. But that all changed with one whispered rumor, a DNA test that, if true, would undo everything she had believed about herself. The story didn't break in the headlines at first. It began in private corridors, mentioned only in hushed voices, the kind of rumor so dangerous that no one dared to repeat it out loud. But the leak found its way to the outside world. First, a tabloid teased a secret royal scandal. Then, anonymous insiders hinted at what had been discovered. And suddenly, the speculation wasn't confined to the internet's dark corners, it was being discussed on national television. The alleged DNA results told a story no one could have expected. They suggested that Princess Beatrice might not be the biological daughter of Prince Andrew. The claim was as shocking as it was destabilizing. If accurate, it would not only alter her personal understanding of identity, but raise grave questions about royal succession and bloodline legitimacy. And yet, in the face of this claim, the royal family said nothing. No public statement, no denial. Just the eerie echo of silence coming from Buckingham Palace. And that silence was louder than any confirmation. People wanted answers. How could this be? How could someone raised in the royal fold present at royal weddings, representing the monarchy on the world stage, holding titles with ancestral weight, suddenly be at the center of a rumor questioning her very birthright? The internet erupted with theories. Was it a decades-old secret that finally slipped out? A result of growing friction inside the family? Or something even darker, an orchestrated leak meant to tarnish Beatrice's name during an already tense moment for the royals? The palace's refusal to address the situation only added fuel to the blaze. The institution, already battered by controversies from Prince Andrew's scandalous connections to Prince Harry's explosive exit, was now facing a question it could not afford to answer. Because this wasn't about public behavior, this was about blood, about legacy, about the one thing the monarchy has always built its legitimacy on. Lineage. Behind the scenes, insiders claimed chaos, crisis meetings, PR strategies in freefall. Beatrice, always graceful, always restrained, had stopped showing up with her father. No statements were issued, but something in her presence had shifted. The warm tributes on social media were gone. Her public appearances, once filled with subtle nods to family tradition, now focused entirely on her daughter, her husband, and her work. The absence of Prince Andrew in her narrative spoke louder than any royal decree. Whispers turned into headlines, headlines turned into questions. And those questions threatened to shake the monarchy's foundation at a moment when it could least afford instability. Because while the world speculated over DNA, the damage was already done. Something was broken, and whether the story was true or not, it had changed everything. But to understand why this moment shattered everything, we must go back to where it all began, at Beatrice's royal birth. She was born with a title, a lineage, and the world's expectations. But what if her royal blood was never real? On August 8, 1988, the British monarchy welcomed a new member, Princess Beatrice of York. Her birth wasn't just a personal joy for Prince Andrew and Sarah Ferguson, it was a moment of national celebration. As the fifth grandchild of Queen Elizabeth, and Prince Philip, Beatrice entered a world shaped by legacy, bound by centuries of tradition. From the start, she was treated as royalty in every sense. Her christening took place at the Chapel Royal in St. James's Palace, a location reserved for only the most sacred of royal rites. Her godparents were handpicked from noble circles, individuals with deep ties to the crown. The world watched as this young royal took her place in the royal family tree, her future seemingly carved in stone. But if history has taught us anything, it's that the walls of royalty hide more than they reveal. To the public, Beatrice's early years reflected a picture-perfect royal upbringing. Smiling portraits with her younger sister, Princess Eugenie, family vacations, carefully orchestrated public appearances. She was raised inside the most watched institution on earth. Yet, her life remained surprisingly private. Perhaps it was her parents' influence, Andrew, known for his charm and military discipline, and Sarah, the spirited duchess with a rebellious streak. But beneath that public unity, something had already begun to crack. By 1992, just 4 years after Beatrice's birth, her parents' marriage dissolved. The Queen's second son and his flame-haired wife had once captivated the press with their whirlwind romance. But the reality of royal life, distance, duty, and constant scrutiny proved too much. The separation was formalized, and though the tabloids pounced, Andrew and Sarah presented a united front when it came to their children. And Beatrice, only 4 at the time, was pulled into a world where loyalty would soon be tested, more than love. Despite the divorce, Beatrice was never caught in a custody battle. There was no tug-of-war over time or titles. Both parents remained actively involved, crafting a routine of co-parenting long before it became a fashionable headline. Christmases, birthdays, school events. Andrew and Sarah often appeared together, keeping up the illusion of unity even as the palace behind them fell deeper into chaos. And through all this, Beatrice remained composed, observant, watching as the world whispered about her family's fall from grace. But now, with the revelation that her paternity might be in question, every smiling photo, every formal appearance from those early years takes on a different tone. Were they memories or masks? Because if the man she once called Papa wasn't her biological father, then the entire foundation of her identity, the royal blood that gave her a place in history, suddenly becomes a myth. Not just for her, but for a monarchy that insists lineage defines legitimacy. Yet behind the polished walls of the palace, a different struggle was taking shape, one that had nothing to do with crowns. No one knew that the young princess was quietly fighting a battle that would define her entire character. While the world saw polished photos, pristine uniforms, and palace traditions, behind Beatrice's composed smile was a silent struggle that began when she was just 7 years old. That was the age when doctors confirmed something she had already started to sense: she was dyslexic. For a child growing up under the constant spotlight of royal expectations, this diagnosis was more than a label. It was a challenge to everything she was expected to be. In a world where public speaking, formal education, and flawless performance were not just routine, but required, Beatrice found herself falling behind, unsure, misunderstood, and often overwhelmed. But she didn't give in. While other students sailed through their classes, Beatrice learned to fight for every word, every page, every sentence. Her struggles weren't always visible, but they were constant. Reading, memorizing, processing information, it all took longer and demanded more than anyone around her could fully grasp. Instead of shrinking under pressure, she chose to face it head-on. When it came time for her GCSE exams, standard in British schooling, she made the bold choice to delay them by a full year. Not because she was giving up, but because she needed time to prepare her own way. It wasn't a failure, it was a statement that her journey wouldn't follow the blueprint others expected of her. She was writing her own, and slowly, her determination began to change the narrative. Beatrice didn't just pass, she excelled. At St. George's School in Ascot, she earned A-levels in drama, history, and film studies. More importantly, she was elected head girl in her final year, a role that required both leadership and respect. Not something handed to her because of her royal name, but earned through integrity and resilience. Her peers didn't just see a princess, they saw a fighter, someone who had every reason to hide her struggle, yet chose to speak openly about it. In 2005, she broke the silence and went public with her story. She spoke about her dyslexia not as a weakness, but as a strength that had forced her to find her voice in ways others didn't have to. It was a bold decision, especially for someone raised in a culture of secrecy. But Beatrice made it clear, if her pain could help even one child feel less alone, it was worth it. She became an advocate, not just a symbol. The girl who once felt isolated by her learning challenges was now standing on stages, meeting with students, and pushing for awareness. And for the first time, her role in the royal family seemed less about tradition and more about impact. Her private battle had become a public mission, and in doing so, Beatrice found something more lasting than titles. She found purpose. But this inner strength didn't just stop at school gates. It carried her far from royal traditions. Princess by birth, executive by choice, Beatrice stepped into the real world, far from tiaras and tradition. In a family defined by protocol, where every move is choreographed and every word weighed, Princess Beatrice did something that stunned even her most loyal followers. She left the royal cocoon behind. Not in scandal, not in protest, but in quiet defiance. While others leaned into their titles, Beatrice leaned out. She didn't want her name to open doors. She wanted her work to speak first. And so she entered the workforce like millions of others, at the bottom. Her first real-world experience came behind the counter at Selfridges, one of London's most prestigious department stores. There, the granddaughter of a queen served customers, without recognition or entitlement. It was humbling, intentional, and deeply symbolic. From there, she moved into more elite spaces, the Foreign Office's press department, and later the Financial Times, where she explored journalism and media with a quiet curiosity that few ever saw coming. These weren't royal assignments. They were real-world efforts to break out of the palace-shaped mold she had been born into. But it was in the corporate halls of Sony Pictures where Beatrice's path took an unexpected turn. As an intern, she was navigating the corridors of power in Hollywood, far from the Buckingham corridors she knew. It was a bold leap into an industry built on stories, images, and narratives, many of which had shaped her own public perception. Yet just as her momentum was building, it all came crashing down. The infamous 2014 Sony hacking scandal exposed confidential data, disrupted careers, and dragged Beatrice's name into headlines she never asked for. Rather than cling to the role, she chose principle over privilege and quietly stepped away from the company. It was a move that spoke volumes. This wasn't about optics. It was about integrity. And then came New York. In 2015, Beatrice left behind the fog of London and the shadow of royal expectations to rebuild her life in America's most electric city. She didn't take on charity appearances or royal panels. She stepped into the private sector and embraced the challenge of being just Beatrice York. No titles, no fanfare, just hard work. She took on a senior role at Paternity, a data and software company focused on artificial intelligence. There, she wasn't a ceremonial figure, she was a decision-maker. As Vice President of Partnerships and Strategy, Beatrice began leading initiatives that had nothing to do with the monarchy and everything to do with business innovation. But more than that, she used her platform earned, not inherited, to champion women in leadership across the globe. She traveled, she spoke, she led. Not as a princess, but as a professional. She showed the world what it meant to own both a crown and a cause, without compromising either. Her journey was no longer about survival within a royal system. It was about creating something entirely her own. As she built her own life, love found her, and so did a title far older than the British crown. Her wedding wasn't just about love. It was a royal chapter rewritten by scandal, privacy, and noble bloodlines. For most royal brides, marriage is a spectacle broadcasted, choreographed, immortalized in headlines. But for Princess Beatrice, it was something else entirely. It was a quiet rebellion, a reclamation of control in a world that rarely allowed her the final say. She had fallen in love with Edoardo Mapelli Mozzi, a man of aristocratic roots who carried a title older than hers, Count, inherited from an Italian lineage that, while no longer officially recognized by modern governments, still echoed with centuries of prestige. Their relationship had grown quietly, far from the limelight, and by the time the world noticed, it was already deeply serious. Their engagement was traditional in announcement, but unconventional in timing. The palace revealed the news in late 2019, sparking speculation about the kind of celebration that would follow. But the fairy tale wedding the world expected never arrived. First came the pandemic, bringing with it lockdowns and public health fears. Then came the fallout from her father's scandal, a storm that hadn't yet finished unraveling the Windsor walls. Prince Andrew's association with Jeffrey Epstein had gone from troubling to catastrophic, and every public move involving his name was scrutinized. His disgrace didn't just tarnish his own image, it cast a long shadow over Beatrice's most intimate plans. The royal reception at Buckingham Palace was cancelled. Then the entire ceremony was postponed, and when it finally did happen, it was done in silence. On July 17, 2020, Princess Beatrice married Eduardo in a deeply private ceremony at the Royal Chapel of All Saints in Windsor. There were no public fanfares, no processions, no crowd-filled balconies. Only a handful of people were in attendance. Her father still walked her down the aisle, but he was noticeably absent from the official photos released afterward. It wasn't just a scaled-down event, it was a statement of quiet resistance. Beatrice wore a dress that carried the weight of generations, a vintage Norman Hartnell gown that once belonged to Queen Elizabeth II. It had been altered to fit her, but the symbolism remained untouched. On her head, she wore the Queen Mary fringe, tiara the very same worn by the Queen at her own wedding. It was a moment of dignity, subtle defiance, and emotional depth. Soon after, the family expanded. In 2021, Beatrice gave birth to her first daughter, Sienna Elizabeth Mapelli Mozzi, a child who carried names from both family legacies. Then, in early 2025, she welcomed a second daughter, Athena Elizabeth Rose. Both were born into nobility, but not through the House of Windsor. Their titles, Countess or Donna, depending on how the tradition is interpreted, came from their father's side. In a twist of irony, Beatrice, a princess by birth, had daughters whose noble identities stemmed from a foreign lineage, not the British crown. These girls will grow up with titles that sound royal, but with no guarantee of place in the royal institution that once defined their mother's world. And perhaps that was the point. Beatrice had forged a new legacy not bound by palace rules, but shaped by her own quiet choices. But while her family was growing, a devastating revelation was growing louder behind closed doors. It started as a whisper, then a leak, and now it's the scandal threatening to destroy royal bloodlines. No one saw it coming, least of all the woman at the center of it. The world had always known Princess Beatrice as the daughter of Prince Andrew, granddaughter of Queen Elizabeth II, and a woman shaped by tradition. But suddenly, that identity was under siege. A rumor had escaped from the shadows, one so dangerous, it could unravel the very foundation of Britain's most powerful family. According to the whispers, a DNA test existed. And if the test was real, it revealed something unimaginable: that Beatrice was not Prince Andrew's biological child. At first, it felt like gossip tabloid nonsense meant to stir chaos during a fragile period for the monarchy. But this wasn't just a rogue headline. Reports claimed that the information had come from behind locked doors, leaked through a private investigator or perhaps an old legal document long buried. Some said a journalist had been sitting on the information for years, waiting for the right moment to let it explode. And explode it did. Because unlike so many royal rumors that rise and fade in a news cycle, this one stuck. It echoed louder each time the palace refused to speak. There was no denial, no carefully worded press release, just silence. A silence that made the story more believable than anyone inside the palace wanted to admit. And in the absence of truth, speculation took over. Analysts began to question what it would mean if Beatrice wasn't Andrew's daughter. How would it affect the line of succession? What would it mean for her daughters, already tied to noble titles through their father? Would her place in the family be reduced to a formality? Or worse, erased from history books that trace lineage with mathematical precision? But the implications weren't just legal or symbolic, they were deeply human. For Beatrice, the revelation cut through decades of memory, ceremony, and trust. Every royal portrait, every father-daughter appearance, every whispered "Papa" took on a different weight. It wasn't about her title anymore, it was about her identity. About whether the man who helped raise her had been doing so with a secret buried beneath layers of royal protocol. And what made it even worse, what shattered the illusion entirely, was the palace's choice to say nothing. Their silence wasn't protection, it was abandonment. It left Beatrice alone to face the most invasive kind of scrutiny. Every photo of her childhood was now re-examined by the public like evidence in a courtroom. Every interaction with her father, viewed through a lens of suspicion. And the world demanded answers from a family trained never to give them. If the story was true, it didn't just reshape Beatrice's life. It rewrote a chapter of royal history. But even if it wasn't, the damage had already been done. Because once a doubt like that enters the room, it never fully leaves. But the most painful part wasn't the rumor itself. It was how her own father responded. No press conference, no statement. just silence, and a daughter turning away from the man who raised her. In the royal world, where every gesture is scrutinized, sometimes it's what isn't said that speaks the loudest. After the DNA rumor exploded across headlines and speculation drowned out fact, Princess Beatrice made no public declarations. She didn't sit for interviews or write impassioned denials. Instead, she did something far more revealing. She disappeared from her father's side. For years, she had been his quiet defender. Even during the height of Prince Andrew's controversies, she had been seen standing beside him, offering the unspoken kind of loyalty that the public rarely understood. But then, she wasn't there anymore. Not at events, not in photographs, not in whispers from the palace. The woman who once walked through royal gates with her father now stood alone, or with her husband, or with her daughter in tow, but never him. And then came the digital silence. Her online world, once peppered with nostalgic tributes to family moments and glimpses into her royal upbringing, had changed. Mentions of Prince Andrew vanished. Old posts, once filled with warmth, were quietly scrubbed away. In their place, her daughters, her husband, her causes. It was more than a social media update. It was a surgical removal of presence. One that didn't require explanation because the intent was unmistakable. Insiders began to talk, not on the record, but just enough for the whispers to grow louder. One source claimed Beatrice was blindsided. Blindsided not just by the rumor itself, but by the truth that no one had the courage to confront it head-on. Another said she had been asking questions for years, only to be met with royal walls. And when those walls began to crack, she realized she had to step away. Not just from Andrew, but from everything connected to the silence surrounding him. Meanwhile, her sister, Princess Eugenie, remained still, loyal, present, though discreet. Some believe she stayed to support Andrew through the storm. Others say she simply couldn't bear to tear the family further apart. Whatever her reason, the sisters, once inseparable in the public's eye, were now walking separate paths through a minefield neither of them created. And inside the palace? The silence Beatrice projected outside became a mirror for what insiders described as emotional chaos within. Reports of panic, of sleepless nights, of a daughter's heartbreak shaking the walls of a family already weakened by scandal. One aide even called it an emotional collapse, not just of trust, but of the unspoken understanding that blood would always come before truth. Yet Beatrice wasn't lashing out. She wasn't taking revenge. She was doing something far more powerful. She was reclaiming her voice in a family that had stolen it through silence. Her rebellion wasn't loud. It was measured, intentional, and deeply painful. Now the question looms. What role can Beatrice play in a family that may have lied to her from the start? As the monarchy shifts under pressure, one woman's silent truth may shape its survival. The British royal family stands at a crossroads unlike any it has faced in generations. King Charles, once the steady heir-in-waiting, is now fighting a battle far more personal than politics or protocol cancer. The diagnosis came not long after his coronation, catching a nation off guard and sending quiet waves of fear through a monarchy already riddled with fracture lines. Then came the second blow. Princess Kate, beloved and symbolic of the monarchy's modern face, revealed that she, too, was undergoing treatment for cancer. Two of the most visible, stable figures of the royal family were suddenly absent, fragile, human, and into this void stepped Prince William, not just as a future king, but as a man determined to keep the institution relevant. He's made no secret of his intentions. The monarchy, in his eyes, cannot survive on tradition alone. It must evolve, lean into youth, embrace accessibility, and most of all, rebuild trust. To do that, he needs more than symbolism. He needs people. And that's where Princess Beatrice, long dismissed as peripheral, becomes critical. For years, she's lived quietly, never far, but never central. She wasn't on the front lines of public duty, didn't chase headlines, and rarely sought attention. But now, that very discretion may be her greatest strength. In a family scarred by scandal and silence, Beatrice's low-profile integrity offers something powerful: credibility. She's relatable, she's professional, and she has walked through fire without saying a word. But the question remains, will she come back? There are signs, garden parties, charity events, appearances at royal engagements where her presence feels less symbolic and more strategic. William has shown a willingness to bring extended family into the fold, a return to the model Queen Elizabeth once used when crisis loomed. And Beatrice fits that model perfectly. She's educated, articulate, deeply empathetic, and carries a lineage that, even if questioned, still holds the weight of tradition. Yet her future role may not look like the past. She isn't here to wave from balconies or smile for ceremony. If Beatrice chooses to re-enter the public royal sphere, it may be on her own terms, championing causes she cares about, speaking truth where others avoid it, and showing that royalty can be resilient without being robotic. Her personal journey, one marked by dyslexia, scandal, professional growth, and painful silence, makes her more human than the institution has ever allowed itself to be. In many ways, she already embodies the future William wants to build. Not polished perfection, but quiet authenticity. Not untouchable royalty, but relatable leadership. Beatrice's choice, whether to re-emerge or remain in the shadows, will shape more than her own legacy. It could determine how the monarchy survives the next generation. And whether or not the DNA rumor is true, Beatrice's quiet break from the crown has already changed history. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And we will see you in the next one.